Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is our Year of the Heart and our continuing journey through Brené Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart. This is going to be the second chapter, and I'm wondering what you're going to think when you read or when you hear me read the name of it. So remember that each chapter is the places that we go when X, Y, and Z happens, or when we feel a certain way. So this is the places we go when we compare. And we probably do that a lot in our world, right? I was thinking as I was reading this whole chapter that I'm glad that I grew up when I did, because the world is so much bigger now, in a sense, because there's so much instant communication and you know, even platforms like social media and instant photos even, and things that go online so that everybody can see them. They didn't exist until I was pretty much an adult. So I didn't grow up with all of that, and I think it's hard enough when you're growing up and you're probably comparing yourself in a lot of ways, because you kind of learn to do that when you're growing up. And so I'm glad that my pool of people to compare myself to was a fairly small, I guess, because I was in a small town and my school was relatively small. So yeah, I'm just glad that I didn't have all those other platforms that are around now. And it's easy to get pulled into that even as an adult now, but I think it would be worse growing up with more of that, I guess is all I'm saying. So Brené says that the places that we go when we compare are the following. Obviously, comparison is one thing. Admiration, reverence, envy, and jealousy, which I think is probably the most interesting part of this chapter because it makes me think about them in a different way. Resentment, and then there's two German words that I will probably butcher, but it's Schadenfreude is the first one, and the second one is Freudenfreude. So I'll read those when we get to those. So comparison, actually we talked about this last year with Brené Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection. One of her guideposts says that you have to let go of comparison, because I was just going to say, it's probably not a positive thing. I mean, I suppose it gives us something to gauge our performance by. And she even talks about in the beginning of this chapter that even if she's going to the Y or wherever she swims to swim laps, she constantly has to feel like she has to like beat the person in the row next to her, the lane next to her, whatever it's called when you swim. Is it something that's like ingrained in us? Is it something that maybe we grew up in a very competitive family, or we just saw things on television, or we knew, you know, sports and things as you're growing up, that there might be like a winner and a loser? Or in art, we did talk about this too, like if you try to go and make a piece of art and you're not an artist, and then you're comparing yourself to the person next to you who might be better than you, then it takes the whole fun out of something like that, right? Which is just meant to be a creative expression experience. So she does say comparison's really, it's not an emotion, obviously, but it is something that elicits a feeling that that when we do it, it's I mean, I don't want to say it's always negative, but it's more negative than positive, I suppose. So comparing the self to others, either internally, intentionally, or unintentionally, or externally, is a pervasive social phenomenon. Yeah, and it's just probably getting worse. I'm adding that part, but that's what she says. It's just pervasive. And the way that the researchers about comparison describe it, they say that we use comparison not only to evaluate past and current outcomes, but to predict future prospects. It's true. You could think of like, well, how am I comparing as opposed to this person when they set the Olympic record or something like that, or there might be milestones that you have to reach. So there's benchmarks. Maybe that's a good thing if you're motivated by those things. But as we go into the things that she's listed, like envy and jealousy and those two German words, well, one of them's positive, the other one's not super positive, then it's not such a great thing. So think about this statement. I had to read it about 5 times. Listen to this. This is Brené's definition of comparison. Comparison is the crush of conformity from one side and the competition from the other. So it's essentially trying to simultaneously fit in and stand out. Think about that. That's sort of like, because it's two things conflicting with each other. So you're getting this message like, fit in, but be better, you know? And like conformity again, like there is like, this is the good thing to aspire to, maybe when you're given this, or this is how you're a good person. So compare how your life is going depending on how closely you're living in the same values or whatever to that person. I don't know. Is it a human thing that would naturally always happen? Maybe it is, because even when you think about war and you think that if people are in a circumstance where they're thinking like, well, those people over there have so much more than us, or they have just a happier existence, and so let's go try to take over their land. So I suppose maybe it doesn't even matter with social media and everything. Maybe it is just something that's in us as humans. So as I said, it's more negative than positive, because listen to this. So you can compare upward and you can compare downward. And you might think that if you're comparing to somebody that's maybe not as good as you, or whatever, it might not be a person, it might be like your science project or something, then maybe it would make you feel better. Don't you kind of think that? But not really. So listen to what she says. When we engage in upward social comparison, we compare ourselves to someone who is perceived to be performing better than we are. In contrast, when we engage in downward social comparison, we compare ourselves to someone who is perceived to be performing worse than we are. So just like the example I gave. The direction of the comparison doesn't guarantee the direction of the outcome, though. Both types of social comparison can result in negative and positive, so there's both. But I feel like this chapter was more like you want to get kind of away from the comparison, and it's probably Brené's tone because of the fact that that is one of her guideposts, is letting go of comparison and perfectionism too, which she talks a little bit about in here. So most of us assume that upward comparison always leaves us feeling not enough, and downward comparison makes us feel better than. But researchers found that social comparison can make us happy or unhappy. Upward comparison can inspire or demoralize us, whereas downward comparisons can make us feel superior or depress us. So it's not necessarily the same inversion depending on which direction you go. In general, however, frequent social comparisons are not associated with a life that's satisfactory or the positive emotions of love and joy. They're really more associated with negative emotions such as fear, anger, shame, and sadness. So that's why the message is more like, is comparison a great thing? Probably not. So these are important findings, she says, regardless of the different outcomes. In the end, comparing ourselves to others leads us to those negative emotions of fear, anger, shame, and sadness. Yeah, because imagine if you were thinking about that person and you were like, oh, my science project was so much better than theirs. Well, later on, you probably would feel shame for being arrogant like that. Yeah. It just might not be in line with your values. So Brené shares a bit in this chapter about her own shortcomings with comparing herself. As someone who can fall prey to comparing myself and my life to edited and cultured Instagram feeds, I laughed so hard when the researchers told me that due to the physics of how, I know what she's talking about. I jumped in the middle of the paragraph. she's talking about how there's that statement, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. So she's talking about how the researchers actually told her that the grass is greener because of the perspective that you're looking at it by, but it could be exactly the same grass. And like if you were standing on the other side of the fence and then you looked over at your own yard, that, like, I don't know, it's like a law of physics or something of like how grass is grown, that when you peer over the fence at your neighbor's grass, it actually does look greener. So that seems kind of funny. So again, when you think about comparison, it is about perspective, because you could be better or you could be worse, or it could be exactly the same, but you're not the judge and somebody else is the judge, and then there's these things behind the scenes that you don't even know about, like the parents gave money and the judges know that parent, or I don't know, just thinking of something. So the bad news is that our hardwiring makes us default to comparison, just like the grass being greener. It seems to happen to us rather than to be our choice. All right. So what about admiration and reverence? Okay. So yeah, you might see somebody and be like, wow, I wish I could be as fit as them, or I wish I was that rich and I had a mansion like that. And so admiration can be a positive thing. She talks about reverence, you know, because you think about reverence as being something that's like on a religious level. You know, you think about revering like holiness and stuff. So that, she says, goes a little bit further onto the other line. So she says, what's interesting is that while admiration fosters self-betterment, reverence seems to foster a desire for a connection to what we revere and what we want to move closer to is that thing or the person. So maybe you might become obsessed, and she mentioned Instagram. Maybe you're gonna follow these people and just constantly, like, you know, be obsessed with how they're doing. And then of course, like every day through that, you're also comparing, and maybe it brings you back to shame because you're thinking like, I can never be that fit and I work out every day. What's wrong with me? You know? Yeah. All right, so listen to this envy and jealousy thing. So the word jealous, it's pretty common in our language, right? And I guess if I think about envy versus jealousy, I'm like Brené, because Brené explains that she doesn't really want to say she's envious of somebody. She feels okay saying like, oh, your vacation looked amazing, I'm so jealous, or I'm jelly, you know, like you say, like sort of in a funny way. But really, so this is pretty interesting. The research and also the dictionaries define envy and jealousy differently. So envy really is what we probably are used to calling jealousy. So it is like we are wanting an experience or something that we don't have. But then jealousy, and I have to read this, jealousy is more about being afraid that circumstances or a person or something is going to come and change what we already have. So it's more in relation to relationships, which it's weird. I feel like I can never really say jealous again about somebody's vacation. I'm so envious. There'll have to be like a little short way of saying envious. So according to researchers, envy typically involves two people and occurs when one lacks something enjoyed by the other. Jealousy typically involves three people and occurs when one fears losing someone to another person. Envy and jealousy result from different situations, and they generate different, distinct appraisals and produce distinctive emotional experiences. And so with envy, there's the attraction, competence, and wealth that we may wish that we had that somebody else has. But with jealousy, it might be that it doesn't seem to be a singular emotion, she says, but it's rather cognitive evaluation in response to feeling anger, sadness, or fear. So say it is like your husband or your boyfriend, and then you're out and he's talking to an old girlfriend that he met with, and so you're standing there and you're you're starting to get, like, I'm surprised she didn't say insecure or anything, because, well, I guess insecurity could be a fear. But so then you might feel jealous. I don't know. It's interesting because I've never considered myself to be a jealous person. So that's not a great experience that I could really, like, I can't imagine that I would walk away from that situation and say, I was really jealous when you were talking to her. I mean, unless your boyfriend or husband had like a track record of not, you know, honoring your relationship or something. I don't know, but she did say too, like, and I felt like, oh, good, I'm glad I'm not a jealous person in relationships, because she says it's interesting to note that people who are more satisfied in their romantic relationships are less likely to be jealous about potential relationship threats. However, I thought this was interesting, they're more likely to react negatively to actual relationship breaches. Interesting. I don't know. This is all research based, like I said. And I agree with Brené when she says this. Even after learning about these distinctions, it still feels hard to use the word envious. Maybe it's because envy can have a hostility component to it. Maybe, I don't know, like maybe it seems like you're envious and you really want to like go and steal the thing from the other person. Maybe that's, she mentions religion, and maybe it's like because it's one of the deadly sins, and so maybe it feels weird. And then the term jealous has just worked its way into our vocabulary, like I said, in the way that we could sound almost complimentary when we're saying that we're jealous of somebody's vacation or their haircut or something like that. So regardless of whether we choose to change our language or not, understanding the nuances of the language can help us ask ourselves the right questions when we're experiencing jealousy or envy. If we're feeling afraid or sad or angry, or we're deep in coveting mode, we have the tools now to ask ourselves, am I feeling like I'm going to lose something? Like if you were watching, or if you were looking at somebody's vacation and you were envious of it, you're not feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my vacation. Unless, I suppose, if you're in like lack mentality, vacation's a bad example, but say you are, and we're going to talk about resentment next, but say you're looking at somebody who's rich and you're thinking like, well, I can never be rich because they have all the money and there's not enough money to go around. So there could be that lack mentality too. But back to what she was saying, am I fearful of losing something I value to another person, or do I want something someone else has? If I want something that someone else has, do I want to see them lose it, or is it not about that? If I'm scared I'm losing something important to me, what kind of conversation do I need to have with that person? Yeah, that would be important. So resentment, yes. If you're comparing yourself to somebody else, or vice versa, I don't know, there could be some resentment, especially in that situation with the girlfriend-boyfriend situation. You could be resentful of maybe like you see the girlfriend and you're like the ex-girlfriend and you're thinking like, oh, she's so much prettier than me, and why is he with me? And you just start to get into all those negative things. Or I don't know about you, but when I think about resentment, I think more of it as an angry sort of emotion, more of a like, if you didn't do this, then I wouldn't do that. More like the money thing. Like, if you weren't rich, then I wouldn't be poor, you know, something like that. And this is an interesting question to ask yourself. If you want to know what's likely to trigger shame for you, fill in this sentence. It's really important for me to not be perceived as blank. And I filled that in as I was reading it, and I thought, yeah, that's my thing, because I will feel shame. Yeah. So it's really important for me not to be perceived as. And Brené says she doesn't want to be perceived as resentful. That's like her biggest fear. That's why she asked that. And she goes on to talk about a couple of things like with movies, and how she talks about a movie, Home for the Holidays, I think it was, where there's two siblings from out of town that come in for the holidays, and there's one sibling that stayed home and is like taking care of everything, And that one sibling is so resentful of the other two that went away and like don't have to deal with all the stuff that they have. But Brené makes a really good point that, so if you are a perfectionist or you have these high standards for yourself, you are going to resent when somebody says, like, say she uses some examples of like, oh, I've been up all night, I'm just going to have to call it a night. Like, it's just, you know, it's done. It's not the best I could do, but it's fine. It's done. I'll turn it in tomorrow, like for a project or something. And then, like, being the person that she is, she resents that. And you want to know why? She goes into the detail of the fact that she resents it is because she wishes that she could be the one to be like, all right, I'm just gonna go to bed, and like not, you know, like her perfectionism is getting in the way, and so it's causing her to be resentful that that person can just let it go. So like that movie situation, the one who stayed home is resentful of the two that went away, but the two that went away might be like, that's fine. I never signed up to take care of my parents for my whole life, or, you know, and so the person that's home is thinking like, you should feel as obligated as I do to take care of our parents. And so that resentment is coming more from the fact that that person's envious that the other two maybe don't care or just didn't feel like it was really their responsibility to do the things that she like sacrificed her whole life for. So there's really a lot to resentment, like more than I really thought about. And Brené talks about how she really related to that character actually in the movie, because she has the tendency to really like be a martyr and like, and she wants everybody to see the effort that she puts in. So she's not going to go to bed early and just turn in something that she would consider not to be her best. She's going to resent anybody that does, but it's more because she wishes that she could really just not care as much, I suppose. Resentment is a feeling of frustration. Resentment is the feeling of frustration, judgment, and anger. It's a better than. It's just like a comparison as well. And or hidden envy related to perceived unfairness or injustice. It's an emotion that we often experience when we fail to set boundaries or ask for what we need, and when expectations let us down because they were based on things we couldn't control, like what other people think and what they feel or how they're going to react. All right, so here we're coming on to the last two words, these two German words. So Schadenfreude, there is not an English word that actually encapsulates what this German word means. And she talks about the German language being one that is very descriptive in its words. And it's, I think, you know, like if you look at the Latin roots of various things, you can get to the bottom of things. But we don't really have a word in English that means this. So what it means is, in this case, Schadenfreude simply means pleasure or joy derived from someone else's suffering or misfortune. So it would be like, that person, you know, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something like someone did you wrong and then now someone does them wrong and you're just reveling in it. You're like, ha ha ha, that's karma, bitch, you know, something like that. So yeah, I can't think of a word that would mean that. It would be like maniacal, maybe, I don't know. That's like evil though. So just taking pleasure in somebody else's suffering, but usually there's like a reason behind it because you think that that person deserves it. And so as they were researching everything, they just were trying to figure out like how they could come up with a definition or a word in English that meant it. And the articles that they read seemed to agree that there was just nothing that, like, there was really nothing that they could say in one word. So it's rejoicing at, taking fun in, or getting pleasure from the misfortune of others. The word is derived from the ancient Greek epi, charis, and kakos. I don't know. And then on the flip side of that is the Freudenfreude. I'm probably not saying it right in terms of German, but and she says, to end on a positive note, let's talk about Freudenfreude, which is the opposite of Schadenfreude. It's the enjoyment of another's success. It is also a subset of empathy. Yeah. And it could be comparison too, because imagine if somebody says, I just got this huge bonus at work, and they're telling you, and in the back of your mind, you're sort of thinking like, wow, I'm like applying for welfare right now, and I don't know when I'm going to get another job. And like, so this Freudenfreude is when you are still celebrating in their success, no matter what your own circumstances are. And there's a little extra to it as well, that is, oh, she breaks down the word again. So joy is intentionally sharing the joy of someone relating a success story by showing interest and asking follow-up questions. So it's like, that's great, tell me more. Like, are you going to get another bonus like this? Did anybody else get a bonus? This is like the biggest bonus you've ever had. What are you going to do with the money? You know, so you're just super excited for them. But then the other thing is, as the, like, say you're the one that's sharing the happy news with other people, then there's something called Braggitude, which is intentionally tying words of gratitude towards the listener following intense discussion of the personal success. So say I'm the one saying it, and then I'm getting all the questions and everything, and you say something like, thank you so much for letting me share in this. Like, I'm so excited to tell you. It means so much that you're so excited for me. So you're using that braggitude to say things back to the person that's supporting you. So Brené says, I love these terms and the practical advice. When someone shares something great that's happened to them, we can show interest and ask questions. When someone demonstrates joy when we share ours, we can express gratitude. Thank you for celebrating this with me. It means so much that you're happy for me, just like what I said. And she's talking about, again, she usually like starts the chapter with a story and then ties into the ending, just about the fact that like she might envy an Olympic swimmer or an Olympic athlete, but it doesn't mean that she wants to be them or to be in the Olympics. But it does help her. Like I said, it could be a positive if it's causing you to make self-improvement based on that mark that you just aspire to emulate. And also she ends the chapter with a story of the women's soccer team in the Olympics a few years ago, World Cup 2011, and there was one person who scored a lot of the goals, but that's because of her position forward or whatever she was in the front. And every time she scored, she would always celebrate by going like, you, like everybody that helped her. And that athlete was Abby Wambach from the Wolf, or she wrote in her book Wolfpack. So she says, you will not always be the goal scorer, but when you're not, you better be rushing towards her. So yeah, you want to celebrate in that. So say in that situation with somebody else scores, but you helped. I mean, that's a team situation, but then you can celebrate the success with them, but also be a part of it as well. So, boy, there's a lot to this, because you might envy somebody and you might not want to celebrate with them because you just don't like them, or maybe they're super arrogant about the thing that they have that you don't have. And then maybe there might be a slight thing of like them falling down the stairs, or I don't mean like, hurting themselves terribly, but like tripping on the stairs in that gorgeous dress that you can't afford, and you're just like, Serves her right, But again, all of those things, when we get to the bottom of who we are and we think about living a life of love and compassion for other people and being empathetic, it's only going to come down to us not probably feeling good about ourselves. And if you believe in karma and you are reveling in somebody else's misfortune, then you probably will be on the other end of it in a bad way. So let me know what you think about this one. I had to really reread some of the definitions because, especially with envy and jealousy, it was a new way of thinking about it. And then even the comparison, I hadn't really thought about it being like a struggle in the mind in terms of the conformity and the being better. And I was really thinking about where it all starts and how, maybe it's even like when you're a little kid and you have your toys and then you go to someone else's house and they have 10 times what you have, and you start to be thinking about that. So it probably is just a human way of thinking that maybe we're going to always compare. But we can choose, and I didn't even point that out, but her main message in this is that we can choose how we react when we compare. We can turn it into a bad thing, or we can celebrate in success with the person. And also maybe you come up with an affirmation that's like, yes, I love that. I would like to have that too. And I strive to be there, and so it is, or something like that. Or I know I'm moving towards that as well. And I'm glad that I saw that because it just shows me that it is possible. Somebody else has it, so I know there's enough out there for me too. So it depends on how you're going to take that comparison and run with it. Are you going to make it a negative and dwell in it and be resentful, and then it's never going to turn into anything positive? Or can you take those negative emotions that might have come out of it and turn it around? Something to think about for our Year of the Heart. I hope you're enjoying our journey through this book so far. Let me know how you're doing. Send me a comment. I love reading them, and I will see you on the next video.